They chant Slavic songs. They kneel in Orthodox churches. They name their children after Roman saints and Greek heroes. But when their bones were tested, when ancient DNA cracked open their past, a shocking truth surfaced. These people are not who they think they are, because Balkan blood doesn't match Balkan myth. The identity stitched into flags, prayers, and textbooks falls apart in the genome. Split, mixed, rewritten. A man in Croatia calls himself South Slavic, but 70% of his ancestry comes from ancient Anatolia. A woman in Bosnia buries her child under Christian rites, but carries maternal DNA from Ice Age foragers, untouched by Rome, untouched by Greece. So who are the Balkans? Are they Slavs who forgot where they came from? Romans who never really arrived? Or something far older? Something buried too deep for language to reach? Because identity isn't a straight line here. It's a shattered mirror, each piece reflecting a different conqueror, a different ghost. This land doesn't hold a single origin story. It holds all of them, stacked on top of each other like ruins. Flesh. A hunter kneeling at the edge of the Danube, carving gods into stone. Flesh. A barefoot farmer from Anatolia, crossing the Bosporus with seeds in her satchel. Flesh. A bronze-skinned horseman galloping down from the steppe, speaking in tongues that would become Greek, Latin, Sanskrit, and later, flesh. A Slavic tribe settling in the shadows of Roman ruins, calling it home. This is not one ancestry. It's a battlefield of memory, and the blood remembers all of it. But under every layer, beneath every empire, a deeper rhythm still beats. The one that survived the glaciers, that hunted mammoth, that stood alone before civilization arrived. The first Balkan people, the ones erased from books, their bones still whisper beneath the river stones of Lepenski Vir. But who were they? Not Greeks, not Romans, not even Slavs. They were older, colder, carved out of the Ice Age, while mammoths roamed the plains, while glaciers swallowed half of Europe. They held on here, in this wild, jagged land we now call the Balkans. And somehow they survived. They built homes along the riverbanks, shrines, staring faces sculpted from red stone, eyes fixed on the water like they were watching something eternal. This wasn't just survival. It was identity, long before maps, kings, or churches ever drew the lines. And in their blood, something extraordinary. A lineage, haplogroup I2, still found in the highlanders of Bosnia, Montenegro, Albania. The sons of the mountains, the ones who never left. This isn't just ancient DNA. It's living memory. And what's stranger, these foragers weren't pure isolates. Their genes show a mix, part Western hunter, part Eastern wanderer, a fusion that came before the farmers, before the Bronze Age migrations, before history even began counting years. It's a quiet proof that movement and connection existed, long before empire made it official. But their story? Gone. Not celebrated. Not claimed. Because when identity gets built around language and flags, the older voices fall silent. These were the first Balkans, but not the ones we name statues after. They survived the coldest chapter in Europe's past, only to vanish from its future. And when the ice finally melted, when the rivers opened and the land softened, new footsteps crossed the water. They came not with war, but with something far more powerful. Seeds, tiny grains, that would erase an entire way of life. From the shores of Anatolia, they crossed into Europe, not as invaders, but as farmers. And yet, their arrival triggered one of the greatest disappearances in human prehistory. In some corners of the Balkans, 98% of the local genome was replaced. Not by sword, not by fire, but by fertility, food, and time. These weren't just farmers. They were carriers of a new ancestry. G2A, EV13J2, markers that still shape the bones of Mediterranean men today. Their DNA built cities, fed civilizations, laid the genetic foundation for what would become Greece, Rome, even us. And in the golden soil of Bulgaria, they buried their dead like royalty. One grave at Varna, a man laid to rest with more gold than any pharaoh of his age. Jewelry, scepters, power. But his blood? Pure Anatolian. No local hunter-gatherer in sight. And yet, there was no war. No burned layers in the soil. Just a quiet takeover. Farming families settling on forager lands. Generation after generation. But not all regions welcomed them the same. In southern Greece, something shifted. The DNA turns east. Caucasus hunter-gatherer signals. Strange, older, darker. A second wave riding beneath the first. It hints at a connection deeper than farming. A path not through the Balkans, but across the Black Sea. By 1600 BCE, the bloodlines of Greece were already different, already tangled, and still the transformation spread. Across rivers, forests, mountains, the old blood receded. The new world took root. But this calm would not last, because far beyond steppe, in the endless grasslands of the north, a different kind of people were watching. Not sowers of seeds, but riders of storms don't ask for land. They take it, with hooves, bronze, and fire. From the open steppe of the Pontic-Caspian plain, a people began to move. No cities, no temples, only wagons, animals, and silence broken by the wind. And yet, they would change the world. They were the Yamnaya, nomads. But more than that, they carried something invisible, something no one had brought before. Language, the very roots of the words we speak today. Horse, brother, mother, sky. They echo back to these riders. But their arrival wasn't just cultural. It was genetic. And the signs are still inside us. R1A, R1B. Caucasus and Eastern hunter blood mixed in a new way. Fast, aggressive, and unforgettable. Their presence appears suddenly in Balkan DNA, centuries before they stormed into Central Europe. How? That's the twist. They weren't a single wave. They were contact, trade, war brides, treaties, and eventually takeover. In Mycenaean Greece, we see them clearly. Bronze weapons, horse-drawn chariots, a ruling class with steppe DNA layered onto Balkan farmer roots. But the Minoans? Nothing. No R1A. No steppe signal. Just old Mediterranean blood untouched. Two civilizations. Same sea. Different ancestors. It means conquest without erasure. Culture over culture. Not destruction, but absorption. And in the graves of Balkan warriors, we find them again. Steppe-born men buried in Balkan soil, carrying the language that would one day become Slavic, Latin, Greek. But here's what no one expected. Those steppe genes, they show up long before the known invasions. A trickle that began early. Quiet. Steady. Because this wasn't one invasion. It was waves within waves. Migrations buried beneath migrations. That last surge wasn't just another wave. It was a flood. 6th century. The Roman world crumbling. Borders breaking. And into that chaos came the Slavs. They didn't ride in like the Yamnaya, or build golden cities like the Anatolians. They moved quietly, but in massive numbers. From the forests of what is now Ukraine and Belarus, they flowed south. Families, tribes. Not invaders, migrants. And yet, what they brought changed everything. Language vanished. Entire vocabularies replaced. The old Balkan tongues, Thracian, Illyrian, Dacian, gone from the mouths of their descendants, but not from their blood. Because when the genome was tested, something astonishing appeared. Up to 60% of modern DNA in places like Serbia, Bulgaria, Croatia came from these newcomers. But the rest? It's older, much older, which means the Slavs didn't wipe out the locals. They became them. They married in, settled deep, merged, and from that fusion, new identities were born. Not just Slavic, not just Balkan, hybrid cultures, shared ancestors, a puzzle where the pieces never fit cleanly into a single flag. You'll find R1A, the Slavic paternal marker, but buried beside it, the same Neolithic, Ice Age, and steppe signatures we've traced since the beginning. Bloodlines that stretch across every wave, from hunters to farmers to warriors, now mixing in ways no one expected. And still, the names of the old tribes disappeared, as if history had slammed a door, while the DNA stayed quietly behind it. But here's what no one saw coming. As the Slavs made their home in the Balkans, They weren't the only ones walking through the empire's fading light, because before the Slavs ever set foot here, Rome had already broken the soil. But what they left behind isn't what anyone expected. When archaeologists opened the graves of Roman-era Serbia, they thought they'd find Italians, legions, Latin blood. Instead, they found something else entirely. A teenage boy buried in Viminatium, wrapped in Roman military gear. But his DNA? Sudanese. Sub-Saharan ancestry. In the heart of the Balkans. Under the banner of Rome. Next to him, Anatolian genes. Levantine markers. Traces of people from modern-day Syria, Jordan, Turkey. All buried as Romans. And this is the contradiction no textbook dares to write. The Roman Balkans were barely Roman at all. Not in blood, not in ancestry. They were Eastern, multiracial, a mosaic stitched together by empire, not ethnicity. The soldiers who patrolled these lands? Most weren't from Italy. They were recruited from Asia Minor, stationed at the edge of the world, and buried with honor in foreign soil. This wasn't an empire of conquerors. It was an empire of adopted sons. And when Rome collapsed, its bones stayed, not in law, not in language, but in chromosomes, scattered across Balkan lineages like forgotten footsteps. You won't see their names in the churches. You won't hear their accents in the streets. But their blood is still here, in faint haplogroups, in genetic strands that trace east, south, and far beyond the Danube. Yet while Rome brought diversity through power, something else, quieter, was taking root, not forced by armies, not enforced by empire, but whispered, preserved, a language, a memory carried through the mountains. It didn't come from Rome at all. It came through the mountains, on the breath of shepherds, not senators, through flocks, not armies, carried not in books, but in song. Latin, not the kind carved into marble, but the kind whispered through mist, across high pastures and stone paths, by people who had never seen an emperor. While the Roman Empire crumbled in stone, its voice survived in wool and footsteps, in the hills of Dacia, in the shadows of the Carpathians, and that voice still speaks. Today we call it Romanian, but it isn't Roman, not truly, because when geneticists tested the people, expecting traces of Latin Italy, they found something else. Slavic, Balkan, Old Forager, Steppe, Anatolian. The bones speak of deep roots in the land, not in Rome. But the language? The language survived. How? No great Latin migration, no Roman colonies, just transmission, quiet and persistent, between generations who never left. A paradox. A Latin people with Balkan blood, the voice of an empire, carried by those the empire forgot. And here's the wonder. They didn't build cities. They moved with herds. They crossed invisible borders. Vlachs, nomads, hill people with ancient DNA, speaking a tongue born in the halls of Caesar. The story of identity here isn't power. It's memory. A language passed not through conquest, but through survival. But while Latin drifted on the wind in the north, farther south, another story was unfolding. One where the past didn't echo softly. It was torn out by force and rewritten in silence. Because while Latin drifted through the mountains, a different empire was rising in the south, louder, sharper, and far more visible. The Ottomans. For centuries, they ruled the Balkans not with whispers, but with law, with fear, with mosques and minarets, etching new silhouettes across the skyline. And yet, when we open the genetic map, something strange appears. The empire that shaped culture barely touched the blood. There are traces, yes, J2G, E1B1 markers that show up during Ottoman centuries. They sit quietly in the DNA, present but never dominant, because this wasn't like the Slavic surge or the Neolithic flood. This was an empire of rule, not of replacement. The people changed language, dress, faith, names, but not their ancestry. Modern Balkan Muslims and Christians, genetically almost identical, different prayers, same great-grandparents. And it cuts deeper, because for generations, war was waged between these two groups. Yet the chromosomes don't lie. They were family. So now the question lingers. Did the Ottomans truly change who the Balkans were? Or only how they saw each other? Maybe identity isn't in the bloodline. Maybe it's in the stories, the flags, the fears. But not all arrivals during this time were subtle. One group came through the empire's cracks, with music, rhythm, and silence. A people with no homeland, but a completely different ancestry. And their DNA didn't come from Europe at all. They came with no flag, no kingdom, just music, metalwork, and silence. The Romani. For centuries, they were called outsiders, wanderers, gypsies, pushed to the edges of cities, trapped between superstition and survival. But the genome tells a different story, because when geneticists traced their ancestry, they didn't find Europe. They found India, South Asia. The roots of the Romani stretch all the way to Rajasthan, a migration so long, so painful, it left fingerprints across a continent. And here in the Balkans, those fingerprints still show, in small fragments, in quiet lineages. The Romani story lives inside Balkan DNA. And they weren't alone. Tatars, Yoriks, Proto-Bulgars, small groups from Central Asia, passing through with armies, with herds, with fate. They didn't stay in power, but they stayed in blood. 1%, 2%, faint echoes, but enough to remind us that even the tiniest migration can leave a lasting mark. And then, the Gagauz, a people who speak Turkish, but carry Balkan DNA, genetically local, culturally foreign, proof that identity doesn't obey the rules of language, race, or religion. It bends, it absorbs, it survives, because in the Balkans, there's no such thing as pure, only memory, only mixture, and sometimes, those labeled strangers turn out to be family. So what happens when you test the DNA of two enemies and find out they're cousins? You get the Balkans. 3 flags, 3 languages, 3 wounds still bleeding from the same war. Serbs, Croats, Bosniaks, raised to see each other as rivals, trained by history, politics, and bloodshed to draw lines where there were none. But the genome? It tells no lies. When geneticists compared their DNA, expecting clear lines, clear tribes, they found nothing. No major difference. No ancient split. Only brothers. The same steppe warriors. The same Anatolian farmers. The same Ice Age hunters beneath it all. Separated not by biology, but by flags, by faith, by centuries of fear dressed up as destiny.
And there is the paradox that hurts most. The deeper the conflict, the closer the connection. Visualize it. 3 brothers, standing shoulder to shoulder, each wrapped in a different flag. Each thought the other is not family. But underneath? Same chromosomes. Same roots. The differences aren't national. They're reclinal. Shifting slowly from north to south. Like temperature, like dialect. Not nation to nation. Not border to border. Which leaves us with a haunting question. If these identities were written in ink, and not in blood, what would the Balkans look like when the map is erased? What's left? Not lines. Not nations. Used blood. And memory. Zoom out. Far above the Balkan mountains. Beyond rivers, cities, borders. The DNA doentaker who built churches, who prayed in masks. Who fought which war? It draws a different map. To the west, Italy, Greece. Heavy in Neolithic ancestry. Anatolian farmers, deep and old. To the north, the Slavic heartlands. Carved by the steppe. More R1A. More Orseborn fathers. But the Balkans? They don't sit in one place. They are the bridge. A zone of collision. And fusion. Ice Age foragers. Steppe warriors. Anatolian farmers. Romans. Slavs. Ottomans. Migrants. Ghosts. Every single liar. Still lives inside the people today. They read not one story. They read every story. And that's the paradox of Balkan identity. It doesn't simplify. It reflects. Like a mirror at the edge of Europe. Catching the face of every empire, every traveler, every tribe that passed through. It remembers what others forgot. It holds on to what others buried. And it asks the question no flag can answer. Who are you really? Are you your language? Your church? Your surname? Or are you the footsteps of ancestors you never met? Whispering through your bones? The Balkans might not be pure. But maybe purity was never the point. Maybe identity is not a wall. But a mirror. And the deeper you look, the more faces you see staring back.